Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Nadia Ali. I'm the director of the Center for Middle East Studies here at Brown, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you, those of you in the audience and those of you who are joining us online. So this event is live streamed. So today's event will be a conversation between my colleague, Catherine Spellman-Poots, who is an associate professor at Columbia's Middle East Institute and the Aga Khan University in London. Her research focuses on women and gender dynamics in Muslim communities in the UK and the US. Catherine has a particular interest in rituals and cultural production within the context of diasporic spaces and their connections to wider social movements. And as Catherine is just joining us from Colombia, she has been telling us quite a bit about what is going on there, and it's quite horrific, I should say. Now, Catherine is going to introduce Amitis Motevalli to you in a moment, but I just wanted to say a few words about today's event, which is part of an ongoing series that Catherine and I have been running for over a couple of years, a series that's focusing on gender, body politics, and arts in the Middle East and its diasporas. And we've been in conversation with artists from the Middle East, many of them based in the US right now, some of them sort of moving back and forth. And we've been in conversation with them to talk about the way that their art, their sort of cultural, creative productions engage with issues of gender, body, gender-based violence, and also wider context of war and conflict. So we've talked to Palestinian artist Basil Abbas and Ruan Abu Rahme, who evidently have a pavilion, Palestinian pavilion in Venice right now. The Venice Biennale was just open, I heard. It's a fantastic pavilion. We've also talked to Lebanese artist Tanya El-Khouri, and Iranian artist Morshin Ali-Hari, and of course Amitis was part of the series. And most recently we talked to Palestinian Iraqi photographer and artist Sam Al-Shaibi. So today's event will be the format will be a conversation between the three of us, and towards the end I hope to be able to open up the floor for you to ask questions. I would like to give special thanks to Art at Watson, particularly Joan Hart. Really, without you, and Art at Watson, this would not have happened. So please help me in thanking them. After the event, I'd like to invite you to a reception on the next floor, the second floor. I always get things mixed up. To my mind, this is still the ground floor, and the next one is the first floor, but it's the second floor. And the exhibition will be on until the 8th of May. So I hope you'll be able to join us afterwards. So now I'd like to ask Catherine to introduce Amitis to us.
Right. Well, first, thank you so much, Nadia. It's been such a joy working with you on this project. And it's one of these projects that's really enjoyable and interesting, and I look forward to continuing the work and what we produce from it as well. And thank you so much to Barbara and for everyone else who helped organize this event. It's such a pleasure to introduce Ami. Amitis Motevalli was born in Tehran and moved to the US in 1977, just before the Iranian Revolution. Her work explores the cultural resistance and survival of people living in poverty, conflict, and war. It asks questions about violence, occupation, and the past to decolonization, while invoking the significance of secular grassroots struggle. Her work includes both standalone projects and a variety of ongoing multidisciplinary series. In her recent series, Gulistan Revisited, Amitis is working internationally with a broad spectrum of transnational Muslims in order to research what defines home life and political religious conflict. She's particularly interested in conducting workshops with South, West Asian, Northeast Africans in diaspora, coming from places of political and religious conflict, and collaborating on public art projects She's also the director of the William Grant Still Art Center in West Adams, South Central LA. And she's been honored with several awards, fellowships, and residencies in the United States and internationally. I'd also, before we start the conversation, I want to also extend our sincere thanks to the Persian Heritage Foundation for supporting our project by generously funding Amitis's residence both here at Brown and at Columbia next semester. So thank you so much for coming, and I look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. So, Amitis, before talking about the exhibition, obviously we want to focus on that, but I thought that it would be interesting for the audience to find out a little bit about your wider inspirations for your work. And I know that your last name and the meaning it has is significant for your work. So can you tell the audience about that, your last name and the wider work here?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I do want to take a quick opportunity to thank Joanne Hart and Arda Watson. Really thank Aliza for all of the work that you've done and helped me out, and Barbara. She's not here, but thank you so much, Barbara. Barbara's been amazing. And the two of you for this opportunity to be here and just kind of sit in my work. It's a rare opportunity for a lot of artists, so it's been really wonderful. My last name, Motevalli, is a name that is given to people who care for shrines. And my family actually cared for a shrine in northern Iran. They still sort of are, even though, like most things that become corporatized, you know, in the situation of Iran, everything became nationalized and all of the shrines were made uniform. So my family kept this shrine. I really remember the shrine as a child. It was very important to my father's family, and it was made of wood. The community had to come together, and they had to decide on the aesthetic. And then there were rituals around how you go to the shrine. That was very important. So I observed all of this, and I came as a very young child to the United States, and the experiences here were so different from what I was seeing in Iran, and I was really trying to hold on to a memory of Iran, because shortly thereafter the revolution happened, and lots of other things happened where I couldn't return for a long time. So the shrine was the one thing that was so prominent, and it seemed like it was not only prominent in my aesthetic, but it was also prominent in the way that my family operated. And so the idea of actually caring for and mourning people who have in some way died but were not necessarily mourned or honored was something that it's been lifelong.
Yeah.
So it's definitely been an inspiration. And if we can go ahead and show the first slide, please. Thank you. The other inspiration is just kind of the aesthetic of rituals in Iran. I'm showing this image of an alam. It's basically, there's a ritual called, there's a mourning, not a celebration, it's a mourning ritual for Ashura, where people come out into the public and
Sorry, maybe you can explain Ashura to people.
Sure,
who know.
Sure. So Ashura is a commemoration of the assassination of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein being the grandson of the Prophet, and it was in an attempt for the grandson to go into the city of Najaf and claim to be the direct heir of Islam. And in a battle between the caliphates and the Shia, or what became the Shia, the family, and the followers of the family, this fallout happened where members of the family were killed, were imprisoned, and since that time to the present, every year, there's a commemoration of mourning. And it becomes this ritual mourning that the public gets to do in the name of Imam Hussein, but it becomes a mourning in general for whatever it is that people are grieving. However, I mean, it's pretty layered. Ashura is really layered. I'm really giving you a simple version of it, and I'm sure Mertad, who's here, has a more expansive explanation of Ashura. But what happens is that people come out into the public, and rituals are brought into the public realm. And it's not unlike what people would see Sufis do, where ritual practices come into the public realm. So this alam became really important to me. It was just aesthetically so interesting because there's all these people who come together, they make all these elements, and Ashura ultimately kind of becomes a parade, right? Parade of mourning, but it's a parade. And in some ways, it's not entirely mourning because there are a lot of young people out. A lot of men will take off their shirts and show their bravado and engage in rituals, and it becomes an act of a kind of erotic flirtation among people. It becomes, some acts of homoerotic flirtation. And there's just so many layers going on. So it was so interesting to me. When I first saw it, I was kind of scared as a child. But the aesthetics of the street changed. Lights were turned green all of a sudden. People were out wailing in public, and it kind of became the music, the sonic vibration of the city. And this stayed in my memory because I'm a small child. We leave. All of a sudden, I didn't even know we're going to come here and never see a lot of my family members again. And then certain things really stuck in my head, and some of them were the rituals of going to the shrine. Mm-hmm. Some of them were the rituals around Ashura, and then others were the rituals that my grandfather on my mother's side was a Sufi, so he would have rituals, and I remember some of those rituals. So those really kind of remained in my head. I'm not sure why, and it started to pop up in my work. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with Nader Khalili, and he'd been looking at my work, and he said, well, you're really carrying out your namesake. You're definitely are the keeper of the shrine, because I was actually constantly trying to rebuild this shrine, either on the street or elsewhere. So I think that's, in a way, some of the aesthetic presence. But then the way that I started to do it as a young person was, I grew up in LA. I was hanging out in East LA. We lived in East LA. We were the only Iranians in East LA. So that added to the aesthetic of what I bring. And my mentors were all in South Central LA. So I started to do graffiti as a young person. And I think I was 21 years old. I was going to meet a friend of mine, or a friend of mine was supposed to come and pick me up, actually. And he didn't show up. And I cussing him out, didn't know what happened. Then I got a phone call from his sister. Apparently, he was walking down the street, and police saw him. They tried to stop him, and he started to run, and he was pulling up his pants. And as he was pulling up his pants, he was shot in the back. And he dropped on the street. This was all described to me. Dropped on the street and died on the street. And his body was left on the street for about 16 hours. And I went down to the neighborhood, and I thought about how that's affecting his family. I thought about how that is affecting the neighborhood, all the children in the neighborhood, just seeing this man who was alive, very kind, had a life, went to school with a lot of people in the neighborhood, had a mom, had sisters, and how people were able to actually mourn that because police were surrounding them, and if they got close to his body, they drew their weapons on the neighborhood. So I made a stencil of his face, and I wrote killed by police. I wrote the date, and I wrote in loving memory, and I started to stencil that around the neighborhood, and I noticed that people started to put candles up. So this notion of a shrine wasn't something that was just Iranian. It became something that I really noticed happening in a lot of the neighborhoods that I was growing up in. So those aesthetics kind of merged.
Thank you. What was the shrine in Iran in honor of? Was it one particular peer, or?
It's curious. His name was Imamzadeh Yahya, and there are like thousands of Imamzadeh Yahyas that there are shrines to. Not thousands, but hundreds. He was probably a rich guy. That's probably how the shrine was named after him. He was probably wealthy, and he distributed food or money to people, and he was holy. He had done his Hajj and done all of the things that he was supposed to do, more than likely. And it was actually shrined before him. And more than likely, it was a fire temple, or it was a shrine that was dedicated to some element of nature before Islam.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Great. Well, you have a particular interest in the effect of the war on terror, especially when it started to get automated with drone warfare after 2009. So can you tell us about the research you did on the various ways the war on terror affected women and girls?
Yeah. So 2012, I had the opportunity, actually before that, I started to do research, and I was really interested in how women and girls were being affected by the mass exodus out of the kind of the regions that are called Middle East, but also North and East Africa. And I started to do research, and I got a residency to stay in Denmark and Northern Europe for a few months. And while I was there, I started to have workshops with young women. And while I'm doing this, their brothers were at the same time being recruited by ISIS. And so it was really an interesting phenomenon watching a community that was pretty poor, didn't have access to, they couldn't really get jobs because they were newly out of refugee camps. They had to be in refugee camps for about 4 years in Denmark. And at that time in Denmark, masjids weren't allowed, so people weren't allowed to go and pray in mosques. They had to kind of have a makeshift, they would create their own situations, but they weren't allowed to have this kind of religious relief that a lot of people felt like they needed it because they were fleeing war or famine or some situation. And so I'm going to skip a couple of slides and bring you to this. So I started to do a project. It's an extensive project, and if I get into it, we'll be here all day, but it's actually launching very soon. In May 16th, actually, in Los Angeles, we're going to launch this database. So for years, I did research. I started to do research on women and girls who were being killed post-war on terror, because I noticed that a lot of times women and girls were just not being recognized in any way. And it was this one particular incident. It was after a bombing in France. There was a hunt for the terrorists who had bombed a nightclub, and a story came out about a young woman who was called Europe's first female suicide bomber. And so I became really interested. I was like, wow, okay, who is this person? And then they started to kind of build her character up as this terrorist. She was reckless. She was a party girl who then became a terrorist. And there it is. And so I followed up, and I got an alert while I was in a rose garden. Actually, I got an alert that released the audio from the night that she was killed, because there was a standoff, and she was begging for her life. And as she was begging for her life, you hear gunshots from the police, and then you hear an explosion from the people that were inside the house. Well, the story was apparently, we don't have the full story, but apparently that she had helped her cousin get an apartment in Saint-Denis, just north of Paris. And he was hiding out in there. She was there. The police raided it while she was there, kind of opening it up for them. And she was trying to get out, and she kept saying, I had nothing to do with this, let me out. She's begging the whole time, and they wouldn't let her out. So shots come in, explosion from someone goes off inside, and it was figured out finally forensically that it wasn't her who set off the bomb. But what became really clear at that time, because I wasn't sure, what is her involvement? I'm still kind of digging that because I'm doing a project on it. I wasn't sure, but one thing I did know for sure was that nobody cared whether she died or lived. nobody cared. Actually, they probably cared that she died more than anything. And that's what made me interested, because I got up at that moment and I heard her plea for her life and nobody cared to listen. And I'm looking at roses in a rose garden, roses that I took my very first bath in, roses that are indigenous to my land, that have all been named things like Cheryl Tiegs and Ronald Reagan, Nancy Reagan. And I was curious about the names, and I was so furious, and I was like, these roses all should be renamed after all of these women who are constantly being killed. They're either being killed at the hands of mercenaries, at the hands of bombs or drones, by military, or by other entities that are entering to continue a war, or in transit, or sometimes at the hands of their family. And I wanted to do something about that. So it started out as a graffiti project, and I started to make labels, and you can see it down here. I made labels just at home on cardstock, and I usually framed it so that it was the same size as the labels that were in the parks. And I just started going around and relabeling all of the roses that I saw in the parks. And then I had opportunities to have exhibitions, and I started to dig into the lineage of all of the roses, finding that all hybridized roses, their roots go back to the Southwest Asian, North African regions that were kind of, because of the soil there. So they all go back there, and they were actually removed out of Damascus by a crusader in the Second Crusades who took them to France and kept hybridizing them because he couldn't get them to look and smell the same in France. So this became an extensive project. This database, I got a Creative Capital Fellowship to be able to follow up on it, and I did tons of research, and I started to look at, I have so much data on women and girls and femmes who were killed as a result of these wars. And one thing I started to do was I started to also look at how nations under threat, there became a kind of patriarchal, toxic masculinity that happened. And the rates of femicides in domestic violence rose so high that I started to document that as a war crime as well. And so I started to document those girls too. The database here is basically meant to be an intervention project. So it's like an online graffiti project. It's a memorial. And if you look for a rose, let's say you're setting up a garden, my target audience are gardeners, people who love roses in their gardens. And if you're looking for a rose, the idea is, I've been working with some engineers, that it'll divert SEO so that you can actually see my webpage, my database, in the first at least 2 pages when you do a search for a rose. And let's say you want Montezuma rose, you'll click on my database, and up comes Hasna Ibulasen, and it's no longer, the name has been changed, so that's the honorific name. It's no longer called by its colonial name on my database, but it still has all of the information on the rose. So if you want to actually plant one, you can, and it has the information on the martyr, and then it has a link that you can purchase the rose outside of, that takes you outside of the database, and you also can purchase a little plaque to put in front of the rose that you buy on my database that has the name of the martyr that's listed. So I wanted to actually give you all, this is just the JPEG, so it's not, I'm not showing you the live version because we're still working out little kinks, but this is a preview of the database that's going to premiere in mid-May.
Well, I mean, there's so much to say, and there's so many layers. I mean, listening to you, and we had conversations before, I mean, one of the things that I find striking is, or I feel that there is resonance between the way you look at the killing of girls and women and gender-based violence more broadly, and I guess the way that I've been also doing it in my work, in that I think it's very clear that while you have this critique of the war on terror and the use of drone and a wider critique really of imperialism, especially the role that the US plays, you don't stop there. You are interested in the regional, local actors and perpetrators, and including, religion, culture, families, and but I wanted to go back to the question of rituals, because it's all also I have seen Shia rituals, and as you say, I mean, they can be people think of them often as quite sort of scary and violent, and also sort of quite macho and masculine. But what you do is you're subverting these rituals of mourning and rituals of grieving and rituals of endurance. And I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the ways you're doing it, and what's your kind of, what are your inspirations? I mean, your inspiration in terms of your family history and your commitment to keep the tradition going, but then the way you subvert these traditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the resonance is not accidental. I read your work, and then I go and make my work. So, what you're doing is pretty important for us artists. What was happening when I was doing this research and gathering the data was that I was reading over and over and over again about these horrific incidents of how people were being killed, how women, girls, and femmes were being killed. And it weighed on me. It was hard. I could not continue, and I had to stop for a little while. And I just wanted to really engage in some kind of ritual that would give me relief. I do my own Dervish practices. I do my own Sufi practices. And so at that time, I was also organizing. I've started numerous collectives. That's really important to me. I think collective work is really vital. And at that time, I had founded a collective called Muzis. We called ourselves that because someone was derogatorily calling me a Muzi. And it was a collective of queer people who fall under the umbrella of Islamic in any way. And some of them were Jewish, and many were atheists, and they wanted to have access to their rituals, but were ostracized from their own communities and ostracized from queer communities. And so I wanted to create a safe space and had the opportunity to do that. And in doing so, I was one of the old, I was the elder there, and people wanted to practice some sort of religious rituals. And so we got into, chanting together and all of that. And I needed to mourn. So I would gather my collective and I would do some sort of mourning ritual. And you see that's specifically what we have on display, actually, in this exhibition. We have photographs, documentation from rituals that I did to be able to mourn all of these women that I was documenting, because the way that I function is that each woman that I document, I'm having kind of a conversation with her, and I think about her, and it haunted me. So I started doing, the first one was Puck, where I just subverted the ritual of cleansing, really thinking about what is cleansing me. And I brought some of the collective together there, and we, first I started it out. I had musicians, because the drum, especially the deaf, is really important for me and my religious practices. I remember someone telling me years ago that the deaf, which is a large drum that's usually held up and has chainmail on the inside, that the deaf is the way that many humans believe that they would communicate with the deity. And that really resonated with me, because it goes somewhere, the vibration goes somewhere deep in my heart. It's so somatic. So we had the drum, and we just started to cleanse ourselves over and over again. I put 5 bowls in a circle. One was water, another one was dirt, another one was my favorite theory books, torn up in there. I may have torn up some of your articles in there. And one was a bowl of wine, and another one was a bunch of gold party glitter, because I just thought, these are the things that are cleansing me. These are the things that bring me safety and peace. And I just cleansed myself over and over again in the ritual cleanse. And other members of the collective joined us, and you'll see that photograph. And then I started to do other rituals. I want to show a couple of them if I can. So, and I actually wanted to show this image really quick, because this is inspiration for the costume in the first performance that you'll see, because I actually also started a collective that was reading to each other aloud this book, The Conference of the Birds. We had a few people in the collective that had gone through so much trauma that they couldn't read the book, and they wanted to get the information. So we did a read aloud. I actually learned from one of my mentors when he was in prison. He had reading groups, and the same sort of trauma was happening, and also lack of access to education in prison. And so they had their reading groups where they would read aloud. And I started that with this collective. And so we read this book aloud, and we were really inspired by the birds in the book and the concept of the Simorg, which is the kind of deity that all the birds were running to. But I'll show you this one first, and no, this one first. And let me start it from the beginning. I apologize. There we go. And just to describe a little bit, so just before this, myself and the museum I was working with, the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art, we sent out an email to as many people as possible, asking people to send us their pain, so that I can actually, I felt like I was actually able to use those needles as a conduit to take on their pain. And I did this performance on the 20th anniversary of the initiation of the war on Afghanistan. And it was a path from Leslie Lohman Museum down Broadway and into the epicenter, and then down into the park. I'm going to fast forward just a little bit. And we put the needles in the shape of the Twin Towers on my back. And I wanted my costume to look like the alam that I showed you, so I designed it like the alam, including the headdress. At the bottom, we had dangling. I laser cut some birds, so some of the birds were dangling. And that quote from Attar's book is written on my costume.
Oh my God.
They built a shopping mall where there are still people buried. So I basically, I'm going to fast forward a little bit more. But basically, I started to block memorials that were dedicated to war. I did not block this memorial because it was a site of mourning. Move on? Okay. And then I want to show you this other one that I did in Los Angeles. It was on Hollywood Boulevard, and it was actually the first live stream performance in the city of Los Angeles during COVID. So this was dedicated to women, girls, and femmes who had been killed as a result of who were killed in a war crime as a result of domestic violence. I did research on that and found so many names. And I decided to do a painting with my own blood. And I wrote a stream of consciousness response to the family members of these girls. By the way, I also write Matam, and that's this song. It's a song of mourning. And there you see me drawing my blood. A couple of the rituals.
Yeah, it's quite, I mean, sort of between heavy and really challenging and sad, but also, well, as someone who's sort of familiar with Shia rituals, very inspiring to see how you're kind of turning things around. And also, I guess, the gender dimension, because one of the things that we didn't talk about, but when, in terms of these processions of mourning, it's men who are doing the processing of
Correct.
mourning, right? So
Yeah, it made me
Yeah.
think about sofre rituals. I've attended many of them and have written a lot about them, and how the sofre rituals are a gathering for women only, usually in homes, and you call upon a holy figure such as Hassan Mojtaba or Abu Faz, but also some women as well.
Rogoya.
Yeah,
My mom used
exactly.
to hold the rituals
Yeah,
for Rogoya
yeah,
all the time.
Yeah. But even though you're calling upon men, it's a very personalized ritual where women come together and will cry or celebrate. It could be joyous, it could be mournful, but you also make a personal wish. And it was a time for women. It was a real women's space.
Yeah.
And it's also been sort of reclaimed in many creative ways in the diaspora and in Iran over the generations. So it's another really important ritual as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely inspired by Sofre.
Mm.
Like I said, that was another thing. My mom, when growing up, she was always holding sofres in our home.
Mm.
So, I always had to help with that ritual.
Yeah.
And I got to stay.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
well, I can't help but, I mean, this is not something that we had sort of discussed before, but as I'm, listening to you and I'm seeing the images and I'm kind of feeling something in the room, I do wonder about perception, in terms of how does especially a Western non-Muslim audience viewership, what are the reactions? And I mean, I guess for me, again, drawing parallels, I'm always worried when I write about gender-based violence in the Middle East and worry that that might contribute to the already existing stereotypes about, these oppressive Muslims. Now, rituals like that are used, I mean, certainly the traditional, the sort of Shia rituals are often used to show how barbaric, how violent these people are. And so putting needles in your back is also a form of self-harm and violence. And so how do you negotiate that? That sort of being based in the States and being aware of the stereotypes, wanting to subvert, being committed to the girls and women who have been killed, but at the same time also committed to challenging,
Yeah.
existing stereotypes.
I think I gave 2 master classes, and the first master class was really focused on my earlier work, where a lot of it was a reaction, and it was a reaction to the white gaze. And the second one was not. And I think I got to a point where I just stopped trying to explain myself. And I started to make work for what I considered my tribe. Now, my tribe is not necessarily Iranian. So I started to make work and bouncing off community that I was building. And I've worked very hard in community building for many, many years. So in doing that work and bouncing off of my community and reading your work and wanting to kind of have my own response to it, because I get stuck with words. I don't have, for me, I'm interested in a visual, tactile, sonic language. I love reading, but I can't express myself in the same way. So wanting to have a response to that. So I fill myself with knowledge that I think is important to define those boundaries. And then I allow myself to make the work freely. Because I feel like once I've filled myself with that knowledge, once I've gone into those practices within my community, then it becomes automated. And to a certain extent it does. And I do bounce it off of my community constantly. I do really have conversations with people about my work, and sometimes, they'll argue something that I don't agree with, but it's a good opportunity. Having these dialogues amongst people is really important. It's a good opportunity to, if I really feel strongly about my work, to actually stand by it, So I think that's the way I do it. Again, the building of collectives and challenging one another is really important. And I have done that one too, and that's on display upstairs, where, I used the chain on my back and, it was blistered and bleeding and everything else. And the tribe that I'm talking about, it was pretty mixed. So I did reach out to people from the Southwest Asian, North African, East African communities. But also the person that was my wrangler and took care of me and healed my back and completely understood my ritual is someone who's Chicana and Filipinx. She was not from those regions. Other people in the community that were, totally diverse. So I think when I say tribe at that point, it became people that are also not necessarily regionally my tribe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time. Should we open up?
Yeah.
Yes. So we have a few minutes for questions, comments. If you could use the microphone because we're live streaming.
And I did put up some new images, so if you want to ask about that, feel free.
I want to ask about those. Those look
Yeah.
from the Venice opening.
Yeah, you were there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I missed this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I don't have a question, only that I would love to
Sure.
hear more about this.
Sure. So, the Venice Biennale opened. It's called Foreigners Everywhere, and the theme. And a lot of the pavilions really dedicated themselves to that idea. And just before that, there was a petition going around among artists and cultural producers to boycott the Israeli pavilion this year. They said, well, Russia's been boycotted. Can we boycott the Israeli pavilion? And the organizers of the Venice Biennale, not the curators, the organizers, made the decision that, no, it's going to move forward. And in the end, it was 25,000 artists and cultural practitioners who signed this document. That's a lot of people that were ignored. And I'd been having some conversations with friends. I wasn't planning on going to the Biennale, but upon reading this, I thought I should go. I've never been. I didn't even know how to plan this because people were like, "Well, it's in the Giardini. No, it's in the art." And I'm like, "What is the Giardini? What are these things? I have no idea. I've never been." So just trying to work it out. But I reached out to a few friends, and my collaborators are really, really lovely. First, it was Courtney Baker, who I work with in Los Angeles. She's an academic, and she writes about the capturing of the violence, the image capturing of the violence of Black bodies. And then we reached out to Maza Mengiste, who's a great novelist, has an incredible book out. And then we reached out to Fatin Abbas, who's also a great novelist. And I reached out to Daniela Lieja Quintanar, who is a curator I've worked with, and I see a couple of heads shaking that know her, who's a lovely, amazing curator. And she curated the piece where I was writing on Hollywood Boulevard, and she and I have worked on issues around femicide for many years. So the five of us got together, and we were very fortunate because at the time a friend of mine organizes a conference called Black Portraiture, and so a lot of people came over to support us from Black Portraiture Conference, and we decided that we needed to do something to mourn because the theme of the Israeli pavilion was motherland, and just the term mother broke my heart. But this claiming of a motherland through a pavilion, through an arts pavilion, through something that comes together in so many ways. Right next to it, Jeffrey Gibson talking about peace, talking about love, something that comes together every year and brings nations together in love, claiming a homeland, and it became a kind of notion of violence. And I thought about all of the mothers that were not being mourned, all of the mothers who had been killed. So I reached out to this community of lovely people, and I said, can we do a ritual? And got some roses. I work a lot with roses, as you see. And we wrote the names. I did research, and I only did research from October 19th through the 21st, and got 175 names of mothers that were recovered, whose names were recovered, who were killed in the recent genocide in Gaza. And we wrote those 175 names on rose petals, and we did the ritual right outside there. And we also went around town and we got the words that were written on the Al-Shifa hospital, and because I was labeling something and I found this thing, the Brother P Touch, it's so exciting. I was like, we should do poetry with this. So I'd called Maza about doing poetry, and I thought, well, let's do the Al-Shifa hospital stuff. And so we got the words that were written on the Al-Shifa hospital. We wrote it in English because we were communicating with that audience in particular, and we went to the events where the Venice Biennale was happening. And we put the Brother P Touch labels with, the statements that people wrote on the walls of Al-Shifa Hospital there. So that's what we did. And the police came over, they stopped us, and they asked us for our immigration documents. Yeah, and we weren't the only ones, because just before that, I was in the Dutch pavilion where there's a really beautiful show of a lot of miners and laborers in the Congo who had come together and created artwork. And they had been hiring also some of the laborers from the Congo to do the documentation and be present. And I saw the police basically following people who were in their pavilions to take that as an opportunity to detain and deport. So it was happening throughout, foreigners everywhere in the Venice Biennale, not at the hands of the curators, of course, and artists, at the hands of the new fascist regime. So,
gosh, are there any other questions or comments? Yes. Mm-hmm.
yes, please.
Thanks. Of course, I'm very interested in this. Thanks for the kind words. I want to acknowledge how great this project on gender, body politics, the Middle East. I'm so glad you're doing that, and so this is an important contribution. I'm very interested in mourning rituals. Luckily, I've been able to be in Iran to see Ashura, and it's fantastic the way you can subvert that in your work. But it also, it made me think that maybe a way to extend this, because you're so interested in community, is the Tazieh, so much of Ashura and mourning in Iran, for those who don't know, it lasts a month, is about this passion play, and that's been used so much in politics to reinscribe certain values way beyond its religious significance. I don't have to tell anybody on the panel this, but because you are subverting, and in the honor of women and girls and femmes, I wonder, with your community, there would be a way for also you, and you're obviously a performer, that you could do some version of Tazieh in whatever location, but bringing together some community and enrolling and subverting that story in honor of the women and kids that are killed in war.
And can I ask you to first give a very brief sort of explanation of Tazieh, because I'm not sure that everyone is aware.
The Tazieh is a passion play that happens. It's a street play. It's basically, I think there are so many cultures that do the street plays, but it's a street play. And it is about it's a commemoration also of the assassination of the Prophet's family. So it's also recognizing that incident. But it's played out by different actors, and interestingly, it's always the actor that plays Shemr, who is the enemy, who kills Imam Hussein. They have a hard time in the communities. They like run around and people will spit on them. So I've always been interested in the people that play Shemr. I am not necessarily someone who is a performer, like a theatrical performer. I don't have the interest in performing in that way, but I would definitely support anyone in my community who would do that. Do whatever they needed. If they need me to make costumes or do whatever it is, because I'll do the grunt work. My interest really lies in the rituals and the song. So I have been focusing, and what you don't see in the exhibition upstairs is the writing of a matam, which is the songs of mourning. So I write those. You don't want me to perform them, because if I sang, you all would be mourning, just your ears. So I don't sing them and I don't perform them musically, but I write the songs. And so I decided to take my focus in that way. I think it would be really interesting. And there is an artist, I want to say. Oh my gosh, if some friends were here that focus on that theatrical end, there is an artist that's doing a queer tazieh. I definitely, if someone wanted me to play Shemr, I would play Shemr. I would be interested. I love wearing red too, so yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask Catherine maybe to ask one last question, unless if there's anyone else like to.
Yeah. Yeah, so as Iran and Iranians are still reeling from the Masa Amini protests and the ongoing government crackdowns, which are getting worse and worse in recent days, and we have the escalating geopolitical tensions with Israel, which are reaching a real critical juncture. I'm just wondering how you're navigating and processing all of these complex layers of these crises in your work.
Well, one thing is that what I was noticing is that in a lot of family dynamics, so if we bring the global back into the house, right? In family dynamics, a lot of times girls or the child who's queer in the family, the person that's seen as weak, they become the repositories of blame. And so when the tensions are high, the rates of femicide really increase. And so I start to document that. And I'm definitely concerned about that. I'm sure it's gonna get even higher. When Masa Amini was killed, I think everyone saw it. It became very public. Now, the killing of the disregard and the killing of ethnic minorities, in particular the girls of ethnic minorities, is not something brand new in Iran. It's been ongoing. And I'm glad that at least through the sad martyrdom of Masa Amini, we were able to see, how this young Kurdish woman was being treated in Iran by the police. And then we started to see people who had solidarity with her get treated the same way. And then girls were starting to show their agency. And it was in reaction, obviously, to the agency that we started to see more and more street deaths, but also femicides within the home. That's what I want to focus on. I really want to focus, and maybe through, I don't know, my little work and the work of other artists that are starting to really focus on this as a war crime, as a continuation of the war crime, as a form of internalized. I mean, I'm a Fanonian in the end. I black skin, white mass. Learning about the internalized colonization is I could recite it to you right here, and the idea that we've turned it inside and are doing this within our own families is really something that I hope to bring some awareness to, that I hope to be able to have some agency and talk about. Or if nothing else, I hope to be the cool drink of water that some of the women in Iran and other places need to drink, or here need to drink, so that they feel a little like there's someone that feels what they're feeling.
Well, thank you very much, Amitis. I would like to thank you all for coming, and maybe a round of applause to them.